Higor had always lived a life measured by silence, the kind of quiet that settles deep in a man's bones after years of working alone. His hands, marked by time and craft, carried the stories of every table and chair he'd ever restored. The studio smelled faintly of varnish and cedar, a comforting mix that spoke of patience and purpose. That's where Millie first appeared, sunlight at the doorway, unsure yet curious. She held a worn wooden box in her hands, the kind that had once meant something to someone. In that moment, Higor looked up, and for the first time in years, something in his world shifted. Just slightly, but enough to notice. Millie was 32, beautiful in the way time and heartbreak often sculpt a woman, soft, resilient, and quietly uncertain. She had come to Higor's studio because the box reminded her of her grandmother, a piece of her past she couldn't let fade. When she spoke, her voice carried both strength and fatigue, like someone learning how to trust life again. Higor listened more than he talked, nodding, occasionally smiling, his eyes tracing the details of the box, and, unintentionally, the grace of her hands. For a man used to noticing every curve of wood, every shade of polish, this new kind of beauty felt both familiar and disarming. He offered her tea, jasmine brewed the old-fashioned way, and as the steam rose between them, so did a strange, unspoken connection. It wasn't about words or glances. It was something deeper, born from two people quietly recognizing their own loneliness in each other. The ticking of the old clock filled the spaces where conversation hesitated. Millie smiled, and Higor felt that rare spark, the one that makes the ordinary suddenly feel meaningful. As she left that day, her perfume lingered faintly in the air, and he realized that his workshop, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel empty. Something new had begun, though neither of them yet knew how much it would change them both. In the weeks that followed, Millie kept finding reasons to stop by Higor's studio. Sometimes she brought him coffee, other times just a question about her furniture piece that no longer really needed fixing. What drew her back wasn't the project. It was him. There was something magnetic about the way Higor moved. Slow, deliberate, as if every gesture had meaning. He'd tilt his head while listening, his eyes steady, absorbing every detail as though she were part of a painting he was trying to understand. It made her feel noticed in a way that was both comforting and a little unsettling. Higor, on the other hand, tried to play it cool, but he couldn't help noticing the way her laughter filled the quiet workshop, how it softened the edges of his solitude. He found himself waiting for the sound of her footsteps, pretending to organize his tools just to seem occupied. What fascinated him wasn't only Millie's beauty, but her presence, the gentle chaos she carried, the warmth she left behind even after she was gone. He saw in her the same imperfections he admired in old wood, scars that told stories, flaws that made something truly authentic, and without meaning to, she began to inspire him again. Millie started noticing little things too, how his eyes lingered not in lust, but in thought, how his fingers traced shapes in the air when he spoke about design and emotion. He saw movement differently, as though grace itself was a language only he could hear. It intrigued her. What made him see the world that way? What stories hid behind that calm, thoughtful exterior? She didn't dare ask. Not yet, but each visit felt like peeling back another layer of a mystery she didn't know she wanted to solve. And deep down, both knew curiosity was only the beginning of something neither had planned for. It happened one evening, long after the city had gone quiet. Millie had stopped by to drop off some fabric samples, but the soft glow of Higor's workshop lights and the hum of an old jazz record convinced her to stay. They sat across from each other, mugs of tea in hand, the air thick with the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Higor looked different that night, less guarded, almost fragile. He spoke slowly, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't planned to share. "You know," he began, eyes fixed on his cup, "I've spent most of my life trying to understand beauty, and why it's the only thing that ever made sense to me." Millie listened, unsure where he was going, but drawn in all the same. He told her about his younger years, how he'd always been more comfortable with art than with people, how feelings for him had always been something he could see better than say. "When I look at someone," he confessed, "I notice the smallest things, the way they move their hands, the rhythm in their breath, how light touches their skin. It's not desire, it's reverence, I guess." His honesty disarmed her. It wasn't the kind of confession that sought forgiveness, but understanding, a window into the heart of a man who felt too deeply for a world that often felt too shallow. For the first time, Millie saw Higor not as the quiet craftsman who repaired things, but as someone quietly broken himself, a man who'd spent his life translating emotion through art because words had failed him. His vulnerability stirred something in her. She realized that her own pain, her own loneliness, was not so different. There was a beauty in that shared imperfection, an invisible thread connecting them in the quiet glow of that small room. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes told him she understood, and that silent exchange would change everything that came next. When Millie agreed to pose for him, it wasn't about vanity or curiosity, it was about trust. Higor had asked gently, almost shyly, explaining that he wanted to capture her presence, not her image. The studio that morning felt different. Softer light, windows open, the air thick with the scent of rain and fresh wood. He arranged his pencils and sketchbook with a kind of reverence, like a ritual he didn't want to rush. Millie sat quietly, her heart beat loud in her own ears, unsure what this moment meant, only that it did mean something. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was sacred. Higor didn't speak as he sketched. He watched. Not in a way that objectified, but as if he were learning her all over again, line by line. Every expression, every tilt of her head, every fleeting look told a story, and he followed each one with patient attention. Millie felt it, that invisible current of respect and admiration that made her skin tingle. There was vulnerability in being seen like that, completely without disguise. Yet it didn't frighten her. For the first time, she wasn't performing, pretending or protecting herself. She was simply there, and somehow, that felt like freedom. As hours passed, something shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. When their eyes met, the air seemed to hum with unspoken emotion, an understanding that words could only cheapen. He put down his pencil, not because the drawing was finished, but because he couldn't continue without breaking the spell. Neither of them moved for a while. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the room. In that stillness, trust turned into something softer, more intimate. A silent recognition that some boundaries, once crossed, don't need to be defined. And somewhere in that quiet surrender, they both began to change. The days after their session carried a different weight, a quiet awareness that lingered between them like perfume after someone leaves a room. Higor found himself returning to the sketches again and again, tracing the soft lines of her face, the calm strength in her posture. But what moved him most wasn't the drawing. It was what it represented. For the first time, he had seen someone completely and been seen in return. It was as if his art had stopped being about form and beauty and started being about truth. The experience had changed the way he looked at everything, including himself. Millie, too, felt something within her shift. The mirror no longer reflected the same woman who had walked into Higor's studio weeks ago. She carried herself differently now, shoulders back, eyes steady, heart lighter. She realized that the tenderness in Higor's gaze had helped her rediscover the parts of herself she thought heartbreak had stolen. Confidence wasn't about being admired, she learned. It was about allowing herself to be known. That awareness gave her a new kind of peace, one that came not from others, but from within. When they met one last time, there were no promises, no need for explanations. They talked, laughed, and shared tea, as they always had. But now, the silence between them was full of understanding, not longing. Higor rolled up the finished sketch and handed it to her with a faint smile. "It's yours," he said simply. She took it, knowing it was more than a drawing. It was a memory, a mirror of who they had been in that brief, luminous chapter of their lives. They parted with gratitude, not sorrow. And as Millie stepped into the sunlight, she carried the quiet certainty that some connections, though undefined, never truly fade.